Hi guys, my name's Jordan, and in this ant room tour, we're taking a look at my 4-foot long vivarium, currently home to a colony of Australia's iconic and notorious giant bull ants. Originally, this colony of giant bull ants, scientifically known as Myrmecia pyriformis, were raised up from a single queen, housed in a tubs and tubes setup. As the colony grew, I progressively moved them into some larger white-tongue nests to match. Here's the colony around 18 months later. At this point, they had around 40 workers present. Typically, the larger the species is, the longer its growth rates are from egg to worker. Given these giants are one of the largest species in the world, measuring in at around 30 millimeters in length, this was some pretty impressive development. I fed them almost every day, making sure that the developing young always had something to chew on. I also kept this colony warm during the cool winter months here in Melbourne, using a heating mat. This allowed the colony to produce new generations of ants year-round. Amongst the crowd, here you can see the queen, and mother to all of these ants. It's pretty safe to say she's done very well for herself. A little while later, I decided to create a new, more spacious setup for them. A naturalistic vivarium containing soil, plants, and a cleanup crew in the form of springtails and isopods. I made a video tutorial on how I both set this up and introduce ants into it in my latest How to Build an Ant Nest video. But just to quickly recap, I started with a 4-foot long glass tank. Then I added in a layer of clay balls for drainage, followed by a meshing to help this area stay clear of debris. Some charcoal for purification, some soil from my backyard. Then I added in some driftwood, rocks, plants, and a layer of red sand. And finally, secured on a custom designed acrylic lid to prevent the ants from escaping. After placing the ants inside, they quickly got to work, eagerly digging into the soil to construct their new nest. Here's what the setup looked like just before the ants' arrival. And here's what it looks like today, around a couple of months later. They've certainly been busy. All of this uplifted soil you see here is the work of the ants. Early on in their constructing, the ants had created multiple entrances to their nest. Under this piece of wood here, and these rocks above. But today, they've reduced themselves down to just a single hole, positioned here. Perhaps this was to do with efficiency. The more entrances that they have, the more work it takes to maintain them. And/or it could also be for safety reasons, with less entry points for potential threats, like other ants for example, the easier they can defend their home. This makes sense given how bull ants, out in the wild, are often found nesting nearby some highly competitive ants, like meat ants and sugar ants. Unfortunately for them, being harassed by these guys is often the norm. I rarely see this colony shifting soil around anymore too, and if I do, it's only for small maintenance work, often shortly after I've given the setup a spray of water for example. I'll see a little bit of activity as they quickly repair any damages. But that's it really. So I think they must be fairly happy with what they've created down there. It's a shame I'll never fully know what their nest structure looks like. However, I have been able to get a little glimpse into their home. If you remember from the previous video, I positioned some power packs, which are used to run the lights above, against the side of the enclosure. The heat which these power packs radiate has been keeping the surrounding wall of the tank nice and warm. And it didn't take too long for the ants to notice. You can see they've burrowed out a chamber right up against the glass. Unfortunately, there's lots of fine dirt particles stuck to the glass, making the view inside fairly cloudy. But of course, it's better than nothing. I find they often use this chamber for storing their pupae, which does best in these dry and warm conditions. All ants go through 4 stages of metamorphosis. Firstly, an egg, laid by the queen. Then, eventually this egg will hatch into a larva, the stage which they do all of their feeding, and most of their growing. Once it's big enough, the larvae of some ant species, like these bull ants, will spin themselves into a silken cocoon, like these ones have. This helps protect them during their development into their 3rd stage, a pupa. And from there, they'll finally eclose and reach their final stage, an adult ant. You can see the ants are starting to get a little irritated by my bright filming lights here, so let's leave them be for now. Up above ground, I've noticed lots of these empty cocoon casings lying around. Check out this tiny baby isopod making a meal of one. So cute. An empty cocoon, of course, means that a new worker has arrived. I've counted at least 10 of these casings so far. So based on my last count, back when the ants were first introduced to this setup, that makes at least 50 workers now. And after getting a small glimpse into their nest, it's clear there's lots more to come very soon as well. The colony is really growing nicely now. You'll probably have noticed some other things growing pretty well too. Lots of weeds. They're springing up all over the place. I dug up this soil from my backyard, where I did notice some weeds present. I didn't sterilize the soil at all, so it's no surprise it started sprouting. But what did surprise me was how especially abundant the weeds formed in and around the bull ants' nesting site. This is no coincidence. As the ants have slowly been expanding and maintaining their nest structure, they've been inadvertently shifting seeds hidden deep below the surface to higher, more idyllic conditions, giving them an improved chance to germinate and spring to life. Just one of the many reasons ants are so important within ecosystems. Although I'm not really a fan of these weeds. It kind of ruins the semi-arid theme I was originally going for when I created it. So I might need to do some weeding at some point. During the day, there's really not too much happening with this colony. I only ever see the ants just sticking their heads out from their nest entrance. And maybe occasionally seeing 1 or 2 workers venturing out for a feed. Here's one enjoying some raw honey, one of their favourite foods. The reason they're so inactive is because these bull ants are actually a nocturnal species, most active during twilight hours. When compared to closely related daytime foraging species, such as Myrmecia nigroscarpa, these guys have a slightly different structure to their eyes, making them roughly 20 times more sensitive in low lighting conditions. So during the day, it's pretty rare to see more than 2 workers out and about, and even then, they never stray too far from their nest. So to really see these ants in action, we have to come back after dark. It's around 9 PM now, and the lights above have now shifted from day to night. This blue light here is designed to simulate moonlight, and so allows the ants to forage with very little disturbance, and gives the ants a distinct indication of night and day, so that they can better follow their natural, biological clocks. The vivarium really comes alive after dark. Almost like clockwork, all the isopods and crickets come out from their hiding and search for a meal. And shortly after, the ants follow. Bull ants rarely lead their fellow colony members to a source of food. Instead, they forage alone, which is quite unusual for ants. So it's only by coincidence that all these workers here have discovered this apple. And again, unlike most ants, who navigate by following scent trails and travel in lines, these bull ants mostly use their acute vision to navigate and rely on visual cues, like this central log here, so as to orientate themselves and find their way to and from their nest. As you can tell, these bull ants love their sweets. Mostly I offer them fresh fruits. I found that ripe pink lady apples seem to be their favourite by far. The ants don't actually eat the apple, but rather lap up its juice using their labiums, basically the ant equivalent of a human tongue. Sometimes their technique for extraction can look rather comical. The ants also require a source of protein too, especially important for the development of their larvae. For these guys, this usually comes in the form of crickets. Once every few days I'll add some in. As I'm sure you can guess, these bull ants are very efficient hunters. With their massive serrated mandibles, potent venomous stings, and incredible eyesight, these ants are not to be messed with. Despite this, they're actually far more interested in getting their sugar fix. Often, they'll completely ignore crickets passing them by. And sometimes even drink with them, side by side. Although, they're not always in the sharing mood, occasionally lashing out at their unwanted companions. A quick bluff charge is usually enough to scare them off. And then, it's straight back to business. It kind of reminds me of dogs competing for a bone. The bull ants are the top dogs, baring their teeth and feeding on the choicest parts. And the crickets? The underdogs, which only get the leftover scraps, which the top dogs don't care for. Or, if they're daring enough, they'll sneak their way in and chow down whilst they're distracted. Quite an interesting dynamic to observe. The ants' larvae almost exclusively rely upon insects for their nourishment, whereas the adult workers mostly run off sugars. So perhaps there's not that much larvae present within the nest at the moment, and so no real need for hunting insects. So at this point in time, if the ants have a choice between apples and crickets, this is almost always the end result. Here's one that I found that finally decided to go after a cricket. Her large specialized eyes allow her to spot and precisely track its movements. Once she gets close enough, she grips on with her huge serrated mandibles and injects her victim with a potent dose of venom. This particular species of ant has some of the most toxic venom in the entire insect world. And so even a tiny amount is enough to quickly incapacitate this cricket here. Even so, the ants are still very cautious around their prey, and often look rather timid. But eventually it gets carried back to their nest, where it'll be fed to their growing young, helping ensure the survival of the colony's next generation. So what do you guys think of this colony? Of all the ants in my care, these guys are probably my favourites to observe. Their sheer size, excellent vision, and rather quirky characteristics just makes these ants stand out from all the rest. Even the cat seems to enjoy watching them. It's one of his favourite pastimes. That and sleeping on the couch. Before we get on to our regular contest, where I give away one of our custom designed Myrmecia, I just wanted to let you guys know I've just launched a Patreon page. Patreon is a platform which is designed to help support independent creators, such as myself, through fan funding. All the videos I create here on YouTube are written, narrated, filmed, and edited by me alone. So if you enjoy my content and want to see more of it, more often, please consider chipping in. Any contribution vastly exceeds individual ad revenue here on YouTube, so even just a single dollar goes a really long way. Plus, depending on your pledge, you'll have access to exclusive patron rewards, such as behind the scenes sneak peeks on future projects, and early access to my videos. Regardless of whether you choose to make a pledge or not, I'd just like to take this time to thank you guys. When I created Ants Australia all those years ago, never could I imagine it would come as far as it's come today. You guys have really inspired me to pursue my passions. I feel incredibly privileged to have such an amazing, supportive fan base. Again, thanks so much guys. Now, onto the contest. In last video's contest, I asked, what made you want to keep ants? Or if you weren't keeping ants, why not? It was really interesting reading your responses, and it was great to hear that actually watching some of my videos had inspired many of you to give ant keeping a chance in the first place. For me, I originally got interested in ant keeping a while back. As long as I can remember, I've always been fascinated by nature, by all animals big and small. But for some reason, I took a great interest in the small things. I think I must have been around 10 when my parents bought me my very first ant farm. One of those plastic Uncle Milton ones. At the time, I had no idea what I was doing. I remember collecting up some worker ants, like it said to on the instructions, and then putting them in. I recall being incredibly underwhelmed by what came to follow. The ants just sat, huddled in a patch of sand, barely doing anything. And within a few weeks, they all started dying off. Unfortunately, this experience was enough to put me off ant keeping, and my Uncle Milton ant farm was quickly shoved under my bed to collect dust. Fast forward about 10 years later, and while sorting through some old things, I stumbled across it again, and thought I'd give it another shot. But this time, I wanted to be a little bit more prepared. Now with access to the internet, a quick search made me realise there was a lot more to ants than I originally imagined, and much to consider when trying to successfully raise a colony. Before long, I was hooked, and caught my very first queen ant back in 2012. This is that same queen here, a rainbow ant, Myrmecia sp. If you look closely, you can see her laying an egg. To this day, I'm still actively keeping ants, and constantly learning new things about them, which is one of the reasons I just love keeping them. There's just so much new to discover. It's one of those things where the more you know you don't know. So the winner of the contest is Lisa Mail, who answered, I've only just become interested in the intricacies of ant keeping and would love to set up a formicarium in my classroom. So much so, I've begun my DIY Hebel nest today by trying to secure the next generation's interest in all things nature. If I can just get one child a year to love nature as I do, I'll be happy. Sounds like a great initiative, Lisa. Congratulations, you've just won yourself one of our size small outworlds. To enter next video's contest, simply answer the following. Which of the ant colonies featured here on my channel is your favourite, and why? Is it these giants? My big-headed ants? Or maybe the trapjaws? Or something else? Post your answer in the comment section below. I'll pick out a single comment and announce them as the winner in my next video. And a special thanks to my very first supporters over on Patreon. Shout out to my top tier patrons, John Overton and Nicholas Atkins. Thanks so much guys, it really means a lot. As always, thanks for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed.